Hi guys, today it's gonna be a really fun day because we have some comments, we have some different things that I want to talk about, and it's been a long time since I want to address them more in depth. And today I'm not wearing a watch. Why? Because I have two different watches that we're gonna talk about, and we're gonna compare them. We're gonna see how vintage can be good or can be less good depending on how much you know about watches. And that's why it's not only to the dealer to know, but also to the customer to know how to identify problems on a vintage watch itself. So starting with comments, we have had a really good video 2 weeks ago, the video about my personal collection. I do enjoy sharing stuff that's really cool, and thank you very much for all the support on that video. It means the world to me, and it's really good to actually share a bit of what I'm doing and what I'm collecting. I have Max Ski B5N that basically says that he was putting watches together and assembling watches. Some parts were from Tudor, some parts were from Rolex, and he was just putting stuff together and selling them on eBay. What I'm going to tell you and what flusters me about comments like these is the fact that people just have hearsays, or they do listen to the type of comments like this one and thinking that that's the reality of what we're doing. And even people said, I'm flustered because I'm maybe one of those guys doing what this guy is talking about. I would not be in business for a long time, and I would not resist on eBay, whereas it's one of the harshest business to build for years and years, selling on there and selling on that platform. It's very hard because people sometimes actually don't know about watches. They do buy watches, but also you have a lot of dealers that buy from me, you have a lot of end customers and high-end collectors that buy almost daily. Therefore, when someone like this tells me that a guy can support an eBay business selling put together watches with fake parts or with two-door parts being at a Rolex, it's not going to last a long time. Okay, it's something that will be reported. The person will have negative feedbacks or neutral feedbacks right off the bat. Starting on eBay, I've seen a lot of new starters or new accounts that have been on the platform for the past 2-3 years. Most of them, they do get negative feedbacks in their first 100 transactions. I don't know why people just think that hitting up even a very knowledgeable dealer with a negative feedback is going to do them somewhat something good. I get a lot less of them because I'm trying to always work out something with a customer. I'm always standing my ground when I do not have anything wrong to do with the transaction or with the listing or anything as such. But when it comes to newcomers on the platform, you cannot resist a long time. This is one of those comments that will hurt a lot of the image of what we're doing. And that's what I'm fighting for, our name, for the image that we have as dealers, because we're doing something right. And I'm believing that I'm doing the best I can as a dealer to have something that's honest, something that's correct, and something that will be basically, if you want to call it this way, an investment on a long term, or if you're really collecting watches, I believe you want something that's good. That's what I'm looking for to comment about, and that's what I'm fighting for. Everything else, you know, you're supporting me, all the nice comments, I thank you for that. But when it comes to something like that, I'm really flustered because people might take it for cash and they think, hey, this is what it is and this is what everyone in the vintage business is doing. And it's not. We don't have time to do so many things that people think we do that are bad for the business. If some people do it, good for them, but they're not going to resist 15, 20, 30 years, not even a year in this business. And that's where I want to talk about the fact that there are so many misconceptions, so many things that are coming from YouTubers right now. So many things that you see or hear or you have as an image of what we're actually doing to vintage pieces to make them look right, to actually have them perfect for us to actually make some money. We don't have time for this at all. Most of the time what we do is basically a service and a change of crystal on most of the watches. We don't touch dials, we don't do anything with the hands. If, okay, right now I have two watches that have been recut, they're going to be listed shortly, and I do believe that now it's somewhat of an accepted process to vintage, but this is where I'm heading, where the originality of the piece is the most important right now. A lot of people right now think also that watches should be looking as perfect as possible. They want to showcase them on Instagram, on TikTok, with their friends. They want to impress people. It comes a bit to the same thing as what people do in the modern world with vintage pieces. But the truth is 90% or 85% of the watches that come are most probably either worn, they have maybe small defects. Sometimes an insert on a vintage sub is replaced. A lot of them on Chrono24 or on eBay have replacement inserts. No one talks about that in their listings. Many things like that that are really important when you're a dealer to know what you're talking about, okay, and what you're selling. This is why the whole video, I'm gonna make a few points about what people think of the vintage and what the reality is. So a lot of YouTubers actually don't talk about vintage because, as a first point, you have an algorithm that basically pushes more of Seiko, more of the micro brands, a lot of Rolexes, AP, Pateks that are really hyped up. You see big numbers, you're really impressed by those $1 million watches or $500,000 watches, and people get attracted by that drama that has to do with those big transactions, okay? A lot of dealers, that's what they're aiming to do. They're aiming to do those 50, 100, $200,000 transactions every day, which is not the case. You don't have people that just have low-hanging fruit, hundred thousands of dollars every day that are just ready to spend on watches. Those are not as high volume watches as what I'm selling. If I'm selling a $3,000 watch, I'm basically touching maybe 75% of the watch enthusiast audience. At some point, almost everyone in the, let's say, Western world that have a bit of money might be interested in buying a more mid-range. I call it a bit mid-range, but it's basically right now almost entry level, those $2,000-$3,000 watches in the mechanical world, in the in-house, and something that might be a bit more attractive vintage wise. This is basically where the market is going right now, in those Cartiers and those, let's say, chronographs of the vintage world that are in that price range. If we're looking for more and we're in the 5, 6, 10,000, and this is also a bit more money for a lot of people, and I do understand that. But okay, the algorithm right now for a lot of YouTubers is very concentrated on a few things that they're looking for. Okay, they're looking for audience. I'm not looking for audience. I'm already running a business. I'm not a YouTuber in any way. I'm actually losing money doing those videos. Okay, there's costs involved, there's time involved, and everything else. I'm here to inform people. If it does bring me a bit of business, good, but in general, it's just about breaking even or losing money. Therefore, right at this moment, you have to understand that I'm doing it for educational purposes. I'm here to share stuff that I've learned over the past 20, 30 years that I've been doing this since I'm a kid, okay? I'm not doing it for the money. So this is a big difference between a new YouTuber to the market, to watches, that doesn't really have enough experience with vintage. Obviously, they're all gonna aim for those new pieces, the hottest pieces in the market, and that YouTube algorithm is not gonna attract them towards that. Also, when you're starting to do YouTube about watches, obviously I do see a lot of YouTubers, they're doing really great, they're doing even better than I do, and they're amazing at what they're creating. The only thing is that obviously you're gonna see a lot of the same sauce to every single video or every single guy that will do those kind of videos, because they're learning as they go. There's that barrier of knowledge between someone who actually starts in the business or the YouTube space versus someone like me who has been doing it for a long time. If you're basically starting with something that's new to you, it's gonna show in your knowledge, it's gonna show in your content. I'm doing content that's a bit different. My content is, in most cases, a bit more niche, a bit more advanced, And obviously, if you're commenting like someone last week, and they were commenting, they were calling me out and saying, hey, if you're talking about Wittnauers and Elgins and Walthams, where are those watches in your personal collection? I found it funny, because I do have at all times some Value 72 and some watches as such. If we're talking of knowledge, I do have the knowledge about those watches. It's only that we are in Montreal. Even though we're not far from the US, many of the Wittnauers, Elgins, and Walthams from the time, or a lot of those, let's say, less in demand in Canada watches, they're not even here. Even though I find some Wittnauers, as I said in some comments, that person has to understand that certain watches are just not made for what I like. I do collect other watches that are less expensive. They're also very good to me and they're treating me well when I wear them, and it's fine to go with that. When I shared the video, it's something that was, it's watches that are a bit different, watches that are a bit less seen on the market today. And also I did advance quite a lot in my taste and my budget, obviously, with collecting certain watches over the years. I was able to trade watches that I didn't pay so much for other watches that are of equal value today, that are worth a lot more now, but I didn't make it to make money. I did it as a matter of collecting something that was more proper to what I'm collecting now. Obviously, you're gonna see a later part of my journey in collecting. So obviously, I'm not gonna have those $200-300 watches in my collection because I was there 20 years ago, And obviously, I didn't have the means to buy or to trade what I'm trading today. It's obviously a journey of many years to go with, and my parents didn't give me $500,000 to start my business or to have fun with watches. And when I was collecting, well, certain watches, I was lucky enough to be able to trade them for something bigger, something that I like better, that I always dreamed to have. And when I got them, well, sometimes it's deceitful, or I'm deceived by what I'm buying, and then I ended up trading for other stuff. It's not that I'm really attached to what's the hottest on the market right now. So I'm gonna be going back and forth with what I'm seeing in the comments and what the video is about, because it all has to be tied up all together. Also, what you don't see about vintage watches with YouTubers is the fact that they don't have any inventory to show for. A lot of times they're just throwing out like phrases about watches, like watches, you have to be careful, you're gonna get burned, watches are Frankenstein. I do see a lot of comments. A lot of people are saying, oh, people say 75% of the watches out there, they've been modified, they're not original, they're this or they're that. It's not true. It's really not true. Obviously, there are watches out there that have been modified, and that's why I'm gonna get to it. That's why I have two of the same watches. One of them actually has box and papers. It does look a bit better than the other one, but the other one doesn't have box and papers, and it's actually better. And we're gonna talk about that to compare knowledge and to compare what the true value of a watch really is about in vintage, okay? And that limited access to inventory actually is very problematic in the market, because if you don't compare apples with apples, you're gonna just throw phrases that are actually hurting businesses like mine and the overall vintage business in general. And this is not good, because in the future you're gonna see those watches of today coming back on the market, 10, 20, 30 years from now, and they're going to be considered vintage. And if you have that mentality, well, none of those vintage watches are ever going to be good, or they're ever going to be considered as good watches to begin with, because you will have that misconception of buying brand new watches all the time. And it's kind of what I'd say 90% of the gray market, or 95% of the gray market is made of, is those vintage or secondhand watches. And they will all eventually become antique. We have to respect what they are and what they will be in the future, because this is the future of the secondary market of watches. What people are also afraid of, I think, in vintage is when you don't have the knowledge, when you don't have the inventory, when you don't have basically anything to show for as a YouTuber in the vintage world. It's not like I'm a retailer of any brand. I'm basically buying whatever I feel like buying, and I feel like buying today a Whitnauer, well, I'll buy a Whitnauer. If tomorrow I'm buying a Yamaha, I'm gonna buy a Yamaha. You know, depends on the deals, depends on the trades and everything else. Then if tomorrow I'm gonna have a Paul Newman that comes through my hands, that's what it is. I'm not choosing my inventory. I kind of go with the flow with what people offer me and whatnot, and I always choose what's best in terms of condition and what I like myself. But when it comes to showing off vintage, a lot of YouTubers are also maybe afraid of controversy. Why? Because you have two different watches that you can show, and one might be very good, one might be very bad. And that's when collectors or professionals or basically people who know about watches, maybe they don't have any, but they know much more than I do or a lot of people out there, they might be calling them out for being fake, for not being good or not being age appropriate, and then you have problems. Obviously, if you don't know what you're talking about, you might be getting into the hot water of getting called out, and that's happening all the time. I also see that on forums. I belong to about maybe 25 groups on Facebook, and I do see people posting amazing watches or all correct watches, and it kind of frustrates me to see people saying fake messages on the same post back to back. And I'm like, no, guys, it's all correct. And people call me out for being an idiot or whatever you want to call me, because it's easier to actually jump on someone who actually knows what he's talking about than, you know, learning anything. It's much easier. That's what people are afraid on YouTube as well, because it's much easier to give an opinion about something that's coming out today than something that was made 30, 40, 60 years ago, okay? And that's what the problem is right now. A lot of people are afraid for the wrong reasons. Also, the next thing that is very, very difficult for YouTubers, you have that gap of knowledge between, let's say, someone like me who has been collecting since I'm 11 or 12 years old. I'm actually almost 40 years old in a few months actually. I'd say maybe 80 or 90% of the audience has been interested by watches maybe in the past, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years, because Instagram told you that it's the time to invest into watches, TikTokers told you that it's time to buy a watch or whatnot, and it was never what this whole industry was about, you know. Pre 2019 or even pre 2017, I'd say a lot of people were all about watches, especially vintage. They were aiming to buy those really cool pieces. I couldn't keep something in stock for more than maybe a month, which was cool. You know, people were looking for those watches because they knew what it was. There was always that dream of collecting certain brands, certain models of certain brands, and it still is the case, but a lot less, because a lot of people did collect those pieces and they already have them in their collections. But someone who just started, who is fed only brand new watches that are coming up, they're being told, hey, you have to buy brand new watches and new releases of 2025, 2026, and so on. Obviously, the interest for vintage is very, very limited, because you're being pushed and fed that information that brand new watches are more interesting. Obviously, there is a gap of misinformation between what I'm giving you and someone who's just starting to do a YouTube channel nowadays, who knows only about those new watches, and also the audience who is mostly starting in their journey of collecting watches or buying their first luxury watch. All of that put together makes it a huge gap of knowledge or of information that I'm giving you, and sometimes it sounds like I'm talking Chinese. It's obviously pretty clear that you need time to learn and you need a lot of effort to put into watches than just going to a retail store and buying what's on display, or just waiting a few months or a few years on a brand new Rolex to get whatever you wanted, you know. So it's a different type of purchase, it's a different type of consumer base, My information is very niche, it's very limited to what people want. It's slowly monetized, if you want to call it this way. It's something that you'll learn over the years, or you will basically accept to enjoy after a certain time. After you've tried so many new watches, you're gonna see you're gonna revolve around the same type of models, same type of brands, and obviously you'll want something different. I am kind of tired of the new model of business. It's very fast food, it's very, let's say, flash content. They're throwing stuff at you all the time, and it's cool. I find it amazing for what it is, and it's driving a lot of people to the conversation of watches. But before you actually get to speak of vintage, you need to do a bit of time into books, and I call it doing time like if you're in prison, because obviously a lot of people find right now that reading is something hard that they don't need to do. Again, it's a commitment. It's something that you want to do by yourself. It's not something that you can necessarily share, especially if you're in a remote area, if you're living far away from a city, or if you're even in a big city and everyone is collecting modern watches. You're going to be a bit by yourself, talking to the walls. So that's why I started a channel, and I always wanted to basically have that conversation with you guys. It's also something that has to be positive in a way. Again, you can't just make up stories that they don't really belong to the market. And again, going back to the comments, I really prefer something that's adding to the channel than something that's just negative and just talking in a bad way and putting everything down, because that's not what we're all about. So now, the most awaited thing about watches is comparing a good versus a bad, or something that was modified, okay? And it's something that's a bit cool to look at, because from far away those two watches look almost identical. But you have a watch that was never polished. It does bear wear marks. It's a Rolex 1680. I believe it's a more Mark IV dial. I have to check, but I think that's what it is. I have the same watch here. This one went through multiple Rolex services. This one, I believe, did not, or at least remained all original. Okay, so out of the two watches here, we have a Mark IV dial, untouched, unpolished. You can see that everything is straight on the case, from the sides to the top, okay? Either side is good, everything is correct. The bracelet, okay, is also pretty tight for the age. I think this one is a patent pending. Yeah, this one is a patent pending, so it's basically one of the earlier 9315s, and they belong to the 1680s. Okay, the Mark 2, 3, 4 reds, we see them a lot. They're mostly dating from 70, 71, and they've been made maybe for 2 years, 2 years and a half. So really cool little watch. That's all correct. I'm not gonna go too much into details, but just to show you the difference, just at a glance, we're also filming here, so you're gonna see the huge difference. Then we have the same watch, same dial. The dial is also immaculate, but it was reloomed by Rolex, I believe in the early, I think it was the early mid 80s, and I do think I have some paper proving that. But it's also been polished multiple times. I did adjust this bracelet to my wrist, and this is a patented bracelet, so this one came just after. It bears the mark patented and not patented, which is basically a patent to just say that it was just waiting for the patent to be accepted by, I believe, either the US or the Swiss or the international patents of the time. What we see here is a highly polished watch. We see that there's still, the line is pretty good, it's pretty solid, but again, it's a watch that might look correct from afar. They look identical side by side, but the bracelet, after being polished multiple times, when I tried to size it, the links are so thin now, the metal is bending really, really easily. That's one of the things that happens on those vintage bracelets. Also, the shape of the lugs. Basically, a lug is coming from almost the top towards the bottom. Now when they polish it, a lot of the times you're gonna see that light actually reflects from the inside out. So basically you're gonna have some kind of reflection that actually shows you that they polished it almost inside instead of being almost flat. It should have came this way. And the brushing as well is different. I don't mind brushing as much. I care about the way the shape of the watch stands out. I don't know if it's gonna show in the video, but although they look pretty similar, this one on the left has been quite a bit modified to my taste. Even though we can bring it back with laser welding, with whatnot, I'm just here to compare something that was done by Rolex, where people tell me, hey, it's really good to send watches to Rolex. When you're looking at collectability and something that's really, really highly collectible, like a Submariner Red, you might not want Rolex to get involved in touching the watch, okay? One, they might change the dial. Two, they might relume the dial, which some Rolex authorized dealers did back in the past. They will change maybe the insert. That also has an impact on the value of the watch and the originality of the watch. You want to see a Mark III insert on those. Also the bracelets. The integrity of the bracelet obviously is impacted when you polish the bracelet multiple times, and it's thin folded metal. When you're talking about something that is folded like this kind of stainless steel, you are going to attack the integrity of the bracelet itself, and that will have a huge impact on you losing your watch potentially. Okay, this is not what you want to do with your vintage watch. You want to keep it as good as possible. If some links are bent or whatever happens, I myself have a lot of parts for those. I can always unbend them or actually replace them with something that I have in stock. Or you might go to your local, some local watch dealers like myself might have parts like I do, and then you're also able to replace those folded links that are damaged. Okay, it's always possible to fix certain things with respect of the integrity of the watch and to the originality of the watch itself. That's a bit of a inside when it comes to those watches, because they're not as easy to see as you might think. It's always the fact that you have a lot of experiencing those watches. It's something that you will see with time, you will develop by learning, by just seeing a lot of them in your hands. With vintage, that's what it comes to. It's your experience kicking in. It's your almost sixth sense or spidey senses about a watch that might be good or might be really bad. And in this case, I own both of those watches, but I did buy the second one in the hope of finding the period correct dial for that one in order to make it all correct compared to what it is now. Sadly, it's never going to be an exceptional watch, but it still has box and papers, which is quite rare. At a certain level, those watches, although they have box papers, you might consider it as a really big, rare piece in a collection, but it becomes a bit of a project because those dials are roughly $8,000-9,000 US, which translates for most of people, the value of a whole watch in terms of what the dial is worth. And although the dial is mint, the dial is perfect, the lume that was replaced does impact tremendously the value of the dial or the watch itself. I think this dial might be worth about $4,000, $4,500 US instead of $8,500, $9,000, $9,500 that the same dial would be worth if untouched. Okay, that does make a huge difference in the collectability of vintage watches. They both look amazing, but they're both so different from one another. That's why when you're looking at vintage pieces, you have to be really careful. You have to do a lot of research and a lot of eyeballing into watches, because that kind of experience doesn't kick in the first 2 weeks of collecting or looking into vintage watches at all. You won't even know how to eat it. Is it going to be with learning from a book, with learning from me, or learning on the fly? It's a bit of everything. It's a lot of research and experience. I hope that this video enlightens you on why I'm into vintage, why I like sharing about vintage. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot to still learn even from my point of view. There's so many things that are also localized. Let's say if someone is in Paris, there will be so many more things to learn about the local culture there of watches compared to Canada, compared to New York, compared to Hong Kong, compared to Japan. And even every city might have different jewelers or different retailers that actually had even Pateks, even Longines that are really amazing. You go to Cuba, their inventory was insane. I've heard many stories of people from England, people from even locally or from even Russia buying watches from Cuba 15, 20, 30 years ago that were amazing, and they brought them back to their respective countries. Therefore, those localized entities that were making or distributing watches locally have created individual pieces or unique pieces, a bit like I have some contacts in Cuba now that sell me watches, and some watches are basically unique to this market, but you need to embrace them, you need to learn about them, and if you don't know anything about what the watch is, you cannot appreciate it or appreciate what it means historically. And hope that those videos are helping you build your collection or build your knowledge. If you want to know more, just comment below. I'm gonna be more than glad to make a video about what you're asking. The other thing, you can always hit me on the website or on Instagram or on my phone number. You have them all on the internet, and we can basically discuss what you're interested about. Thank you guys. Have a great week.